Hollywood versus reality. Coming up. Hey 7-4 crew, welcome back. If you don't know me, my name's Kelsey. I'm a 747 pilot. My channel, 7-4 Gear, is all about aviation. Now, I've always been a huge fan of James Bond, even if they mess up the aviation scenes a little bit. But for the producers of the James Bond films, if you ever were to, I don't know, throw me in as a cameo, I could be out there, do some piloting things in the movie, help you out with some of your aviation scenes. Just an idea, just throwing it out there. All right, let's get into it. James Bond is very fast. I'm sure he's extremely fast, but he's probably not as fast as a plane that's planning on taking off. You see James is running to the plane here, but the plane is already halfway down the available takeoff distance of the runway. When manufacturers of planes make a plane, they come up with speeds for everything. I mean, there are speeds for everything. There's a speed for the best rate of climb, the best climb gradient, the best speed for taking off the plane from the ground. There's a speed called VMU, which is the unstick speed, meaning it's the slowest the plane can possibly get off the ground. They have a speed for everything. And since in this scene here, they're using a Pilatus, which is a great plane, we're going to talk about some of their speeds. One of the great things about the Pilatus, and granted this is a little bit of an older version, but it's able to do takeoffs at a very slow speed and land at a very slow speed. Some military operations will use the Pilatus because they're landing on small little roads in the middle of nowhere for military operations. So it's really an ideal plane for this exact scene. So from that aspect, Hollywood got it right. If you were going to have a very short runway, you would want something like a Pilatus. Ballpark speed, it's going to, of course, depend on weight and the altitude and things like that. But let's just use a ballpark speed of 80 knots would be the speed that it would normally rotate at in order to fly. But even if you only needed 80 knots to take off, you still wouldn't be here in the middle of the runway going slow enough for James to be able to jump into your plane. I've always talked about how pilots will wear their seatbelt always in the cruise portion of the flight, but of course, every pilot is going to wear their seatbelt for takeoff and landing. That would prevent James from being able to yank him or throw him out of the plane if he was wearing a seatbelt. Traditionally, pilots will wear it mostly for turbulence, but now, pilots, you need to know there is a possibility that someone is going to run up and jump on your plane in the middle of the takeoff roll, get in there and try to yank you out of your seat. So from now on, if you're flying general aviation, just another reason to be wearing your seatbelt. So what Hollywood has gotten right here is they've chosen the correct plane. A Pilatus is a perfect plane for something like this, a short runway, possibly at a high altitude. You'd want something like this. A Pilatus typically has a turboprop, which is kind of like a jet engine that you see on your normal aircraft that you fly around on as a passenger. It's like that, except a propeller on the front. Very reliable, a lot of power. It can go up to high altitude. There's a lot of benefits of having a turboprop. So they chose the right plane for this, but most of the other things like getting halfway down the runway before trying to take off and then the pilot not wearing a seatbelt even though he's about to take off, none of those things make sense. Let's see what's next. I think it's safe to make an assumption here with Hollywood, and that is during the scene which James was pulling the pilot out and throwing him outside of the plane, The pilot must have kicked the throttle or done something in order to get the power up from where it was at basically idle power while it was going down the runway earlier in the scene. Otherwise, a plane at this speed definitely would not have had enough power to launch off the runway like this. Which of course takes us to the point of James chasing the plane down and jumping into it or climbing into it while it's descending. Now, that is possible. There was recently, I don't know, a couple months ago, a couple Red Bull pilots did that. They were descending, they set their planes up to go directly towards the ground. They jumped out from each other's plane. One made it in the plane and the other didn't make it in the plane. But here's a clip of a pilot actually doing this, going just like you see in the movie here, jumping and flying and getting out to the side of a plane and getting into it. So it is real and it is possible. Here's a quick clip. The difference is that those planes had boards and the landing gear and they were set up specifically to go directly towards the ground. This pilot that's flying this Pilatus, that's not what he's intending to do at all. He's planning on, I guess, flying the plane to some other Dark Lord base or whatever he's planning to do, but he's planning to go fly the plane, and so it would not work the same way like you saw in that Red Bull clip. Even if the plane didn't have enough speed to take off when it went off the end of the runway, as it started descending, it would have gained speed and would have ended up leveling off, not going further towards the ground like this. See, the wings of a plane don't care where the air comes from. It can come from the plane going faster down the runway, or it can come from the plane descending. It doesn't really matter. To the wings, as long as there's enough air going over the wings are ready to fly and the plane's gonna fly. You may have seen this, I don't know if you want to call it a meme. I got sent it by several different people, but this is an example of what people think that the wheels of the plane are what is going to make the plane go off. It's not like a car. The wheels have no impact. We don't have anything about that that's going to impact the plane taking off. It's the amount of wind that's going over the wings. Here's a video of a 747 during a monsoon. And you can see the nose of the plane is actually starting to lift up because there's so much air going over the wings, the plane wants to fly. So Hollywood did get it right that somebody could chase down a plane like that and climb into the inside of it and then pull it out. That is possible. Red Bull proved that possible just recently. However, the fact that it had enough power to launch off the cliff like that and then go into a direct dive bomb, that wouldn't really make sense. What would make more sense is, let's say, maybe, well, this would be more practical. If you had James go off and then he zipped his jacket and it turned into like a wingsuit or something like that Q gave him, which would be kind of cool. But he turned it into some type of a wingsuit, and then as the plane started to get further out, then he kind of like wingsuited and jetted and landed on top of it and then climbed on the inside. That would be closer to reality than the plane speeding up, going directly towards the ground unless somebody had tied the yoke to make it go directly at the ground. It makes no sense that while it's speeding up, it's going directly to the ground, and it sounds like the engine's revving up more and sounding more and more like a dive bomber from a World War II era fighter plane. Next, we need to talk about this right here. If you were, let's say, a 19-year-old boy driving an old 1980s Honda on the back roads outside of the city from where you used to live at, 110 miles an hour, that car is going to be shaking and rattling a lot, kind of like you saw going on with James there when he was trying to fly the plane. Don't ask me how I know that you can take a very old Honda at that type of speed, but let's just imagine that I saw it online somewhere. Anyways, that car is going to be rattling a lot like you saw with that plane. However, with a plane, the more air that's going over its control surfaces, whether that be the rudder or the wings, the more air that's going over that, the more able you're going to be able to control it. Remember I was talking about earlier the speeds? There's a speed where the rudder becomes effective on a plane. It's different for every plane, depends on the size of the rudder. But that rudder that's going to become effective once there's enough air that's going over it, meaning you're going fast enough down the runway. That means there's enough air blowing over the rudder so that way you can control the plane left or right. So as this plane starts to accelerate, it's got a lot of air going over it. So with just a little bit of movement, there's so much air going over it, the plane is going to react right away. It's not going to be shaking like that. Now granted, directly downhill with probably the power fully in somehow now. It's probably exceeding its do not exceed speed, but planes have a huge margin of buffer of what the manufacturer says don't go above this speed, and then how much further above that speed you can actually go. There's a huge amount of air there because they realize that there are some things that are uncontrollable, like, I don't know, your plane goes off the end of a runway and gets full power, go directly towards the ground. I mean, it could happen. Anyways, the whole thing is that as the air is moving over the wings like that, it's going to be able to be turned up and rotated up very easily. You wouldn't have to fight with the yoke like that. And I'm still not sure why they want the plane to have this fighter dive bomb noise here. Something that pilots train for is unusual attitudes. So sometimes you've seen, sometimes on my stories on Instagram, where I'm getting spun around and the plane's all twisted around, and the instructor wants to see how you would recover the plane from that bad situation. Now, it'd be very hard to get a 747 all twisted and going downhill like you saw there, but let's just imagine that it happens, and it happens in the simulator. But every pilot knows that if your plane's going down like that, it's accelerating a lot, you pull the power back because there's a speed limit that you don't want to exceed. So James, being the well-trained pilot that he is, would know that as soon as his Pilatus started sounding like a World War II era fighter bomber plane, that it would pull the power back and then be able to rotate out of that steep dive that it miraculously got into. And then one of the most important things about being a pilot is your decision making. And you really have to question a pilot's decision after he just blew up a evil lab and then decides to turn around and fly directly over it. I don't know, not the best decision so far.
Turn 10 degrees south, bearing 184.
Yes, sir. Maybe Wade was right. There is no dish.
Now in this scene, James is flying a Cessna 172, one of the most common planes that you will fly in if you ever go to flight school. It's what I learned to fly on. It's a very common plane. It's a single engine plane. It can sit 4 people. It doesn't have a lot of power, but there does have the same aerodynamic capabilities or aerodynamic features of any other plane. You've heard me talk about in some of the viral debriefs, I've talked about trading altitude for speed. Like if the plane loses its engine, it's not in a lot of trouble. It just starts going down, and then by going down, it keeps the speed up so the plane can keep acting like a plane. Well, James is kind of doing the reverse here, and he's trading his speed for altitude. In order to do this maneuver, though, he'd be needing to go very fast towards this mountain, and then would start going up very quickly, and by doing that, he would bleed off a lot of speed, but he would be able to do this maneuver here, although it wouldn't really make a lot of sense, but you could do it. Once he started going up like that, the speed would bleed off very quickly. And the problem is that these planes don't have a lot of power. So if you didn't properly gauge it, granted, it's James Bond, but if you didn't properly gauge it as it went up, if you did start to lose speed too quickly, your options are to, well, go forward and hit a mountain or spin around and go back down towards the water. You're not really leaving yourself a lot of options. It's definitely not a maneuver I would recommend doing with a plane like this, because you're going to be trading everything you got, and if you don't get over the hill, you're kind of in trouble. However, this scene right here is very real.
Turn 10 degrees south, bearing 184.
Yes, sir.
When you are flying a plane, you automatically get more attractive. That 100% is true. So Hollywood got that part right, and they'll laugh at your terrible jokes. There's something that's trending right now on social media where they say something like, he's a 7, but he does this. And then that thing could be something good or something bad, and they'll say, oh, that makes him a 9, or that makes him a 3. So no matter what your number is, when you're flying, you're going to go up a couple points. And so just know that if you're flying, you will get more people looking and smiling at you like this. That, of course, applies to about 95% of the public. That other 5% will be flight attendants and then people who've already dated pilots and know what we're all about. Now we need to talk about this part right here. I have a couple hundred hours in small single-engine planes like this, so it's fine. Let's just imagine on the possibility that this missile hit the plane but didn't blow up, which is, I guess, possible, and it just went straight through the wing, and yeah, okay, so let's just imagine that that's the case because, hey, there are duds. So the missile goes through there, and that part is possible. You saw the plane rock to the left, which makes sense because if it got hit on the left, that would push that wing up, so that part is also accurate. I don't know about her leaning back over to him, but I guess if you're flying with James Bond, that's what you would do. This is the part that I have a problem with. The plane gets hit here a few hundred feet over this lake, and this is a very small lake. So in order for this to happen, he would have had to fly the plane back around and land. This movie came out in the 90s, well before Sully took all those nice people swimming in the Hudson. But what I want to tell you is that if you are ever in an emergency, you are much better to try to get to land. So if he was able to spin his plane around to come in and land on the water, and from that altitude, he could have just landed on land, and your survival rate on land is going to be a lot better than landing on water. On a small plane like this, you can see the landing gear is always out. Now on a small plane like this, without any floats or anything underneath there, as soon as that gear hits the water, it's going to grab that water. That's going to slam the nose down on the ground. Now there's a lot of weight on that nose, so that nose is going to slam into the ground. Once the nose slams into the water like that, the nose wheel is going to just basically grab into the water and the whole plane is going to flip over. Now you just had a missile go through your plane, now you're possibly unconscious because you were just in an accident, and on the ground, well, you have a couple seconds to get oriented and climb out of the plane, which is hopefully not on fire, even though it is in this movie, but you have a much better likelihood of climbing out and getting away from the fire than if you're upside down, in the water, and concussed. So if you are in this situation, Hollywood, and your plane gets hit by a missile, fly to all this land that's all around you, not this little body of water underneath you. If you enjoyed this video, you're going to love one of these two up here. I look forward to hearing from you. Until then, keep the blue side up.